Grand Rising, folks. It's Sigma again with Sigma Programming. Just wanted to say what's up. Shout out to everybody who's been checking out the channel. Shout out to everybody who's been digging the videos, leaving comments, likes, subs. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to all the content creators. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to the ones who just watch. Shout out to y'all. Y'all giving the AIs all the energy they need on the social front. You say on here whatever you want to say in front of the whole world, because it can potentially reach that many. A big portion of the world. We in the realm of the influencer. Every time you hit your phone, every time you go online, you're in the realm of the influencer. This is another form of enchantment. All of it. You know, it's to the point where, shoot, ask the superstars. The superstars know, they know what time it is. They making up all kinds of little skirmishes, you know. Such and such superstar tripped over this superstar's foot. 30 channels cover it. So we know that there's a, what was 50 Cent's one of his albums, A Hunger for More? That was Lloyd Banks. Lloyd Banks, A Hunger for More. On the entertainment front, there's a hunger for more. You can see it. It's getting, folks is reaching. But the themes and everything is still dope, and the symbology is still dope. They are putting it out there. So when it comes to plausible deniability and things like judgment and all of that, the left-hand path on the more satanistic side, they still playing their hand. They still leaving their hand out there. It's not the case with the Luciferians altogether. They still don't call themselves anything when they move. But I think the satanic cults got it's like 10 different branches of those guys. But entertainment was allegedly given to them, given to the left hand. Entertainment has everything to do with entertainment and entrancement. This was part of a military strategy. Whenever you conquer a nation, you're supposed to give them what you want them to learn. You do that with religion. You tell them what to believe in. You give them a cosmology. You back that up by whatever the reading is, whatever the books are, whatever the movies are, whatever the news is, comic books, symbols, everything. This is what you do, though, to take over country. So if you were a group that worship squares, if you had a certain object or symbol, once you take a country over or a nation over, you got to put this symbol everywhere. It's what the Germans did during the time of Hitler. It was like one Reich, one people. It was like something along those lines, but this statement was put everywhere. The beginning and the end, in the middle of probably every commercial, on every wall, on every telephone pole. It was everywhere. And these techniques of mass mind control were ushered over into the American populace, which is not, it's not a Christian country. Even if you hear all this talk in the beginning in the Constitution years about our God this and our God that. No, this country is Masonic. And in Masonry, you have On the bottom levels, things are pointing to the Abrahamic religions, is pointing to those. So when you say God, and when God is written, like even down to the dollar bill, they don't say that to mean the God of the Old Testament and God we trust. They don't mean it that way. There's two different meanings for it. On the lower levels, for those that are just, they enter your basic lodge and everything, and they're coming in on the ground level. You know, for the first, when you first getting in, that's not what that means. It means the God that you call on. That's what it means at first. And a lot of people think that the God that everyone generally calls on is the God of the Old Testament. And this is really not the case. This is not the case. The whole pantheon is being considered, because God is really being used like a title, like a level, not like a being. Is not really used that way. If it did come down to Christianity being like the ruling belief of this country, if it was that way, we would not have been a democracy. We would have been a theocracy, because you have the freedom of faith coming in. You can choose to worship whatever you want to worship. That's really always been the case. But as you go closer to the time before this nation's founding, this wasn't always the case. The free-for-all type of beliefs, it came with a lot of pushback. So you had a lot of people still executing crimes and still ruling in the courts based off rules from the Old Testament. You still had people running their courts with the Ten Commandments. With the Ten Commandments right there, it was based on the Ten Commandments. Now, although these things may still be around the halls of justice, you notice things like prayer were taken out of the schools. And you notice that in a lot of schools, the kids don't do any more Pledge of Allegiances before they walk into the building. Once upon a time, it was like that, though. They would literally say a prayer, or I should say, they would literally go over the Pledge of Allegiance, hand over the heart and everything before going in. Particularly with Catholic schools, this was going on even into the 90s. But this was not an indication, though, that all of America itself was under one God, because it wasn't. And even when people got here, where foreigners had settled here, the natives, they weren't representing the God of the Old Testament. The natives were into the Great Spirit. The land itself was already Wiccan. It was Wiccan to begin with. The people who already lived here back when America was still a Mexum, or you could say this was all one big Mexico, the entity there was called the Great Spirit. And this still goes back deep into your tribes. So the whole idea of worshiping God as an omniscient being, in terms of being the Great Spirit, indefinable but all-encompassing, this was ingrained deeply in many Native American cultures. And this stuff is coming from the East. You had the term Indian, India, Hindu, Hindia. Back when these continents were connected, back when this was West Egypt, the American side of Africa, I guess, which you would call West Egypt at the time, when all of these continents were connected, they were calling on the Great Spirit. And the practices went deep into Hindu traditions with the acknowledgement of an unlimited amount of gods, enough gods for everybody to have a couple, but it all being tied in to an overarching Great Spirit. So that was the first idea of really the internet. It was just a web of different belief systems and different practices. And these things were all tied in under one umbrella. This is how the people on the land governed themselves. And if you want to just go off brass tacks, you can see whose deity did what. If you want to believe it like that. Yeah, companies came and fell with the Anglo-Saxon deities, and corporations and companies still stand that came up from under the Anglo-Saxon deities and Celtic gods and Roman pantheons and Grecian deities. However, going back before all of that, it still was Egypt, Babylonia, Sumer. So it still went back. It still went back to a greater thing. The whole idea of a patriarchy God, the image of a great old man on a throne. These concepts of God are really like no more than maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years old at best. You know, everything before then, there was no general consensus on it. So God was whatever that nation needed God to be. Different groups of people. For some, God came out of the water. For some, God was on the land. For some, God was manifested himself to them in different animals. For some, God is a her. For some, God is a him. For some, God is a it. For others, God is simply who they are. So these cultures, they go deep. And a lot of the metaphysical secrets like law of attraction, law of vibration, universal laws and things like that. Everything from being able to live longer, reverse your years and get a fountain of youth based on breathing techniques. All of this stuff was known then. But thanks to the information age, it brought us into a brand new time of revelation, where all of these things, most of these things that were hidden, they're made so well known that they're technically still hidden, because people been brainwashed for so long to seeing things in one way for so long that they just chalk it up to hocus pocus and science fiction anyway, which was probably a big part of the reason on the decision to release the information in the first place. And that people don't believe in this anymore. We can let them have this, and we don't have to worry about a risk of people believing in this way or putting these things to practice or taking these things seriously. Everybody is too religious, and the big wigs and secret societies knew better. If you were religious, you were already subscribed to a system without power and with dependency. And also what they didn't tell you, again, is that God is a level also. They didn't say anything about that. And there's people still waiting for a quote unquote judgment to fall upon the wicked. And meanwhile, generations of people come and go. They born and they die right off the scene. And the quote unquote wicked are never being rounded up for judgment. No, you got wicked people who pay the prices for their actions. But that happens every day. But you know what I'm talking about, the big imagery, the big, huge judgment, the one big day. Even if it did come down to one big day, how long are you supposed to wait? And why doesn't anybody know? Not even one who was sent from heaven according to the cosmology of Christianity. Not even the one that was sent from heaven, the one that's supposed to be one with the Father. Not even he knows. That's a dark, that cosmology is kind of dark. That's a dark cosmology. But if you want to go with the whole propaganda angle, you basically got people in a holding pattern, waiting for something else to deliver them but themselves, waiting for something else to rescue them and come through for them but themselves. And what are you doing when you're doing that? You're keeping people docile and non-responsive. You're really putting people on mute and handicapping them. Which I wouldn't recommend it. For any group of people, because if they end up rising up, it's gonna be a vicious uprising, because there's gonna be a new generation that comes on the scene that will not be like the generation before. There's only gonna be so many people to be pushed around before a Geronimo pops up. That's just the way it is. And there'll only be so many holding patterns before you get a group like the Maccabees and Conquest. A lot of stuff will end up taking place before these things happen. So it's important for people not to be suppressed and really to nip this in the bud. You would just decide to keep learning every day, Because what if there are intentional flaws put in your cosmologies that were and are designed to handicap you, if only on a subconscious level? This is the reason why you got to take ownership over what you believe. If you don't, a belief will be prescribed to you, because these things are they're like painkillers, like Novocaine. If you're feeling depressed, you can pray, and like Novocaine, it can work. They're not telling you that you believing in prayer is making the prayer work, rather than prayer itself being real, but you making it real. So you have millions, if not billions, of people subscribing to the idea that certain mystical practices are made real. The general consensus makes one big law of manifestation real, that you have to do this or that. But guess what? Now we in the monkey wrench of a time, because those energies are not the same. Those energies are not being pointed to that anymore. The world is back to where it was in the pre-Christian time. It might not look like it because we got all this technology and new cars and everything like that. So it's not going to look like BC. It's not going to look like BCE out here, but it kind of is. It kind of is a time of BC. It's just dressed up different. The wars are different. It's not fought with sticks and stones and guns and cannons and soldiers with bayonets. These wars are fought with smartphones and microphones and studios. These wars are fought with panels, with news stories, with content creators. These battles are fought with trolls. These battles are fought with agents. It's the propaganda front. And all of the warfare is psychological now. I think enough people in the world went hungry to realize that weapons just cost too much. Weapons just cost too much. Tanks and all, it just costs too much. Not for the people who's really funding it though, who allegedly fund both sides of wars and has been ever since war has been conceived. But the people on the lower level who got to be taxed for this, the people on the lower level who's the price of the food and the gas got to go up, and they the ones struggling to pay at the pump. Those are the ones that's being taxed with this stuff. Those are the ones for whom war is expensive, but the one that's running up the bill, they getting paid from both sides. Both parties who are beefing is going to one group for all of the weapons. Whose side is the one selling the weapons? Whose side are they on? Whose side are they on? Or was this about sides in the first place? The duality is right in your face. The duality is right in your face. You know that the opposite of crypt is blood. You know that's over war. That's over red and blue. You see the wars that take place with those two opposing colors, fire and ice. You see it. You see that same thing taking place and took place in politics, red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat. You see it. These things are just layered. And when you use certain language, you can short circuit a person's understanding, and you can jump smooth over their logic and their rational abilities. You're throwing something in front of them to blind them from the truth, to distract them from the truth. And the truth is, there's folks who have such a detailed knowledge of God that they know how to use it as a weapon to keep other people from accessing God. This is what it all boils down to. All of it. So the people who are going to be ostracized the most are the New Agers. And groups like that. Anybody talking about sovereignty and talking about God is within and the kingdom is within and all of the power that you need is within, and those people are going to be and are under the heaviest scrutiny just because of their willingness to unplug. But you have a thirsty, ripe field of people who didn't come up from under religion. This is a younger group, folks that's 25 and under. You know, by the time these folks started getting older, Big Mama and them had passed, and Big Papa and them had passed, and all the years of fish fries and all of that cookouts, a lot of that stuff faded. A lot of the family reunions, a lot of things like that, a lot of that stuff is faded. Because we're really, really in a new age. You have the children of that era who might be in their 60s, 70s, and 80s now, who are still hanging on to what those Abrahamic religions represented. But those numbers are down, you understand, because there are more younger people on the scene now. And let alone Abrahamic religions, a lot of them are coming up with no religion at all. And this is putting them in a better position than a lot of the former generations would suggest. For some generations, if you're not attributing everything to Jesus, if you don't perform certain passwords like "to God be the glory," if you're not saying these things, your perspective won't matter to generations former. So you still do have the last remaining traces of colonialism. And then the ones who prescribe that particular brainwashing are still the ones whose names are on the buildings and companies. They themselves don't believe it. No, they assigned Christianity to collect a certain group of people. And they rounded them up in thirds. What, 3 religions? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They used 3 religions to round people up into thirds. But we'll get more into all of this, and maybe some of this is a reach, but it's still a part of what we would call American history, which I'm sure they're trying to revise and revamp. I see it now, the way they're gonna try to erase the 19th century and kind of make it like nothing happened after the 1800s. It was 1892, and then we went right to 2000. The suggestions and like the energy signatures in this time is kind of like that. Like they want to make it like the 90s didn't exist. They'll tell you 2 things happened in the 90s. Biggie and Tupac died. That's what the whole 90s was about. If you let them tell it, that's what the whole 19th century was. They want to forget about 1984, which was a pre-2021 exercise. They want to get rid of all of that because 84 was practice. In 1984, I was 2 years old. So 38 years later, for a year for every chapter of the book of Job, and here we are. Still in 1984 with just new technology and everything around us, but we'll get into all of that later. I know this was long. Just wanted to get in y'all ear for a minute. Check it out if you want to. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to. I appreciate it. It helps me out. Helps me put this before more people if this is what more people want. All right? Peace.